It's Friday, September 26th, 2025. Happy Friday to you. Welcome to your daily news update on Blip Brief. Small, but almost everything updated every weekday. So we're looking at a bit of a market puzzle today, aren't we? You've got these really strong signs domestically in India, record retail investors, consumer spending looking up, but the index has still ended the week lower. Yesterday, well, it was a negative finish pretty much across the board. It really shows how, global shocks, especially regulatory ones, can pull things down, even with solid local fundamentals.
That paradox is exactly the right way to think about it. Yeah. What happened yesterday, it felt less about any sort of internal Indian weakness and more about, well, external fear just overriding that local optimism. The pressure points were pretty immediate. You had the GIF Nifty showing strain early on. That's often your first clue from overseas trading.
Right, reflecting jitters after Wall Street's soft close.
Exactly. And when that happens, you often see the big institutional players just, well, de-risk pretty quickly.
Okay, let's try and quantify that pullback.
Yeah.
How much did the main indexes actually dip?
Both the Sensex and the Nifty 50, they finished down, roughly 0.7% each. So like you said, not exactly panic stations, but it definitely signals a market that's, taking some money off the table given the uncertainty. But what's really interesting is where some investors chose to shelter during that volatility.
And that brings us to the defense sector, yeah. Acting almost like a safe harbor against that global drag.
Absolutely. I mean, think about it. The main indexes are down 0.7%, but the Nifty India Defense Index, it moved the other way, finishing up 0.7%.
Wow, that's quite a split.
It is. And it's not random. It points to this structural shift. The sector's cushioned by these huge long-term government contracts, all tied into the Make in India push. So when global trade risks flare up, like they did yesterday with those U.S. tariff talks, well, money flows into names like Bharat Electronics BEL. It jumped 2.0%.
Because its revenue stream is seen as more secure, tied to domestic policy.
Precisely. Government spending keeps it relatively insulated no matter what's happening in, say, Washington. Certainty is king right now.
Makes perfect sense. Okay, apart from defense, were there any other bright spots? Anyone else swimming against the current?
Here, Motocorp did pretty well. It was up about 1.5%. And that actually connects nicely to the strong rural demand story we should probably touch on.
Okay.
But the heavy drag, well, it came from where you'd sort of expect export-focused sectors, interest rate-sensitive ones. Trent took a hit, plunging 3.1%. Power Grid was down 3.0%. And TCS, Tata Consultancy Services, fell 2.6%. The IT sector generally, it remains really sensitive to any whiff of economic cooling or regulatory changes, especially out of the U.S., which brings us right back to that global uncertainty theme.
Right. Okay, let's pivot to the domestic policy side then. Seems like the consensus is the RBI, the Reserve Bank of India, probably won't cut rates next week. Even if inflation maybe gives them a little room, why hold back?
It really boils down to flexibility or, keeping their powder dry, as the saying goes. The thinking is they'll hold rates steady next week because they're very aware of those global trade headwinds, particularly the new U.S. tariff situation we mentioned. That could create growth challenges later on.
So by holding now, they keep the option to cut later if things get choppy.
Exactly. They retain that ability to backload any necessary cuts. They keep their main tool rate cuts ready for if or when those external shocks really start biting into domestic growth, rather than using it preemptively. It's cautious, yeah, but forward-looking. Managing external risk, not internal.
Okay, understandable given the global picture. But domestically, things seem to be, humming along quite nicely, right? We're seeing actual proof that those GST cuts are boosting spending, especially outside the big cities.
Oh, absolutely. The domestic consumption picture is really quite strong. It's a huge anchor for the economy right now. You look at Maruti Suzuki, always a good indicator for rural and semi-urban demand. They reported that bookings in rural markets literally doubled during the start of the festive season. That's the fiscal relief working its way through, strengthening the base. And you see e-commerce picking up too, post-GST boost. Internal demand is helping offset that export vulnerability.
And it's not just consumption. Corporate capital is flowing, especially into that defense space again. HAL got a massive contract, didn't it?
Huge. Hindustan Aeronautics Ltd, HAL, yeah, they secured a contract worth over 62,370 crore rupees. For indigenous fighter jets, that's not just a big number, it's a massive guaranteed capital injection. It really solidifies the domestic defense industry for years to come. It's a statement about self-reliance, and it guarantees a long revenue runway for HAL.
And before we move off the domestic story, that investor milestone at the NSE is pretty remarkable.
It really is. The National Stock Exchange's unique investor base has crossed 120 million. Just think about that level of participation.
Incredible.
Yeah, that kind of broad retail enthusiasm is crucial. It provides a solid domestic buffer, a structural anchor against big foreign capital outflows when global markets get volatile.
Okay, so if the RBI is managing external risk, let's dig into that risk.
Yeah.
The Trump tariff news from Washington sounds pretty targeted, and it's clearly got the export sector worried.
Oh, it's a major move, a huge regulatory pivot. The U.S. announced this sweeping 100% tariff on certain branded, patented drugs. But here's the kicker, the industrial policy angle. There's an exemption, but only if the drug companies build manufacturing plants inside the U.S.
Right, so it's not just protectionism, it's actively trying to pull supply chains back onshore.
Exactly. Using tariffs as a tool, maybe even a weapon, to force critical industries like pharmaceuticals back onto U.S. soil. It's a direct attempt to re-engineer global pharma logistics.
And we're already seeing the impact in the data. This isn't just theoretical risk anymore.
Precisely. That tariff risk, that threat to major export markets, it's being cited as a key reason India's private sector growth cooled off a bit in September. Domestic strength is holding up, like we said, but the external side is definitely feeling the heat from Washington.
Speaking of Washington, the U.S. economy threw a curveball yesterday. Those GDP numbers for Q2 revised way up.
Yeah, surprisingly strong. The U.S. economy grew at a 3.8% annual rate in the second quarter. That was a big jump from earlier estimates, driven by consumer spending still holding up, jobless claims falling, fundamentally a robust picture.
But wait, strong growth, 3.8%. That's good news. Why did Wall Street react negatively then? That seems paradoxical.
And that's the confusion ruling the market right now. You've hit it exactly. The market seems convinced the Fed has to cut rates soon. But if the economy's roaring at nearly 4%, what's the urgency for the Fed to cut?
So good economic news pushes out the timeline for expected rate cuts.
Exactly. Strong data immediately clouded the rate cut outlook, making cuts seem further off. It's that classic good news is bad news scenario for stocks right now. You even had a Fed governor weighing in, suggesting the Fed might actually risk damaging the economy by not cutting rates quickly enough. So that just added to the confusion about whether the central bank is sort of behind the curve.
That kind of policy uncertainty usually sends investors looking elsewhere. What happened in commodities? Quick check on money markets.
Gold eased back a little. The U.S. dollar firmed up on that strong GDP data, which tends to weigh on gold. But silver actually rallied. It moved up about 0.3%, helped by strong global cues.
And oil. Geopolitics seems to be the story there.
Yeah, oil's heading for its biggest weekly gain in about 3 months. It's all about increased geopolitical risk and supply worries. Those attacks on Russian energy infrastructure.
Right, leading Moscow to restrict fuel exports.
Exactly. That instantly tightens the global supply picture and pushes prices up pretty much everywhere, just on those conflict concerns.
Okay, let's shift gears quickly to corporate and regulatory news. The RBI seems to be getting tough on fintech compliance. Took action against Simple.
Yes, the Reserve Bank of India told Bengaluru-based Simple to stop all its payment operations immediately. That's quite significant. We don't have all the specifics on the breaches, but it clearly signals much tighter scrutiny from the RBI on the whole digital payments space. Things like compliance, KYC, lending transparency. It's a clear warning to the entire fintech world. Grow, yes, but compliance has to be spot on.
And speaking of digital, that whole TikTok saga in the U.S. looks like it's finally moving towards a resolution.
Seems so. President Trump signed an executive order basically green-lighting the sale of TikTok's U.S. operations. The new American entity is valued at around $14 billion. It paves the way for U.S. investors to take over, resolving that big standoff over data and foreign ownership.
And back with the RBI, they're also tweaking the rules for digital payments generally, trying to find that balance between security and convenience.
That's the tightrope they're walking. They issued new norms, making two-factor authentication mandatory, that's for security. But crucially, they gave banks flexibility on how to implement it. So banks can use things like biometrics or device-based tokens. The idea is to boost security without making transactions too clunky or slow for users.
Okay, one last global point before we get to our science closer. The pressure on U.S. immigration, specifically H-1B visas for skilled workers. This seems to tie into that bigger theme of global competition.
It really does raise a fundamental question. That new, very high $100,000 H-1B fee, it's getting a lot of criticism. Experts are arguing that making it so expensive to bring in top global talent actually works against U.S. competitiveness. especially when the stated goal is countering what some people are calling China Shock 2.0.
Okay, for listeners maybe not familiar with that term, China Shock 2.0, what's the idea there?
Well, the original China Shock was about manufacturing job losses, mostly in the 2000s, due to, outsourcing and import competition. This 2.0 version is more about the competition for high-value stuff, intellectual property, top talent, R&D leadership. So the critics of the H-1B fee hike are basically saying, look, if you make it prohibitively expensive to hire the world's best scientists, engineers, AI experts, you're kind of hamstringing yourself in that global race for innovation leadership, especially in cutting-edge fields.
Right, potentially undermining the very intellectual capital needed to compete. A complex challenge. Okay, let's wrap up our deep dive with something truly groundbreaking on the science front. A potentially disruptive obesity drug.
Yeah, this is really interesting. What's potentially revolutionary here isn't just the drug itself, but how you take it. Scientists just unveiled some quite staggering new data on an experimental oral obesity drug called orforglipron. A huge breakthrough. It's a pill. You take it by mouth. Unlike the current big blockbuster drugs for obesity, which pretty much all require weekly injections.
A pill instead of an injection. That alone is a big deal for patients. But how effective is it? Does it match up to the injectables?
The results look really impressive, yeah. Puts it right up there with the best. In the trials, patients lost significant weight. Get this. Nearly 1 out of 5 people in the trial shed 20% or more of their body weight.
Wow, 20% or more from a pill.
Exactly. That level of efficacy, combined with the sheer convenience of just swallowing a pill instead of dealing with injections, that's the potential game changer here.
That really could transform the treatment landscape. A 20% weight loss from a pill makes it so much more accessible, potentially acceptable to far more people.
Precisely. You're looking at a potentially massive shift. Think about accessibility, manufacturing, logistics. Injectables can be complex, costly. An effective pill could reach millions more patients, particularly in developing countries. It could take this kind of treatment from being relatively niche, maybe higher end, to a truly mass market solution globally. It's disruption purely through the delivery method.
A potentially huge market shakeup, driven by simplifying how the treatment is delivered. A fascinating note to end on. And just before you go, a quick note. This deep dive commentary was put together using advanced AI. We always strive for accuracy, but please do cross-verify any crucial information yourself. Your informed decisions are what matter most.